Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Actually, I think it's good afternoon. I'm a minute late myself. So my name's Stephen Gilderdale. I'm Senior Director at Dell Technologies. I run our pre-sales organization. I've been with Dell for just over 9 years, and prior to that, I used to work for one of our largest customers. So I've been both on the side of the fence of working as a vendor, and I've also been on the side of the fence as working as a customer. So I've come along today to speak to you specifically around multi-cloud and how we can take advantage of multi-cloud. I've built something unique that I've never been through before, and that's specific for this audience. It's to try and give a nice broad set of what is the cloud, why do people use the cloud, why are people interested in the cloud. Please interact, drop questions in the Q&A and in the chat window. And Margareta is here with me as well this morning to help me with some of the Q&A. I think most people know Margareta, but do you want to do a quick introduction as well?
Yeah, hi everybody. So I've been involved with some of the great work that we are the city have been driving for the last while. I'm the Chief Digital Officer here in the UK for Dell Technologies, and I'm going to be supporting you, Stephen, as you run through the wonderful stories and insights around cloud technologies in the multi-cloud area.
Perfect. Thank you. So we'll get going. Again, please do keep this interactive. I have the chat box open on my window, but I have the Q&A box closed just in case there's a lot that does come in there. Please do use the Q&A, and at the end, Margareta and myself will get into a discussion, and Margareta will read the questions out and we'll try and answer them live for you. And we can go as deep as people want to go. Intentionally, I've not taken this too deep because I know it's a broad spectrum of people that we've got. But anyway, with that, let's get going. So as we start, really, I wanted to start with why are people interested in the cloud? Why is it interesting? Why do we talk about it? And I kind of think of it as these 5 reasons why people want to use cloud or why they're interested in cloud. And it's about acquiring IT resources more quickly than you can do in a traditional environment. It's about rapid scalability. It's allowing you to access applications anywhere. And it's not just applications, but it's photos, it's videos, it's content. The cloud provides a higher utilization of infrastructure. And again, we'll get into that in a couple of slides. If done correctly, it should provide a lower cost of infrastructure. It should help reduce energy. It should help reduce facility costs. And it should provide a greater level of IT staff productivity across the organization. And I say it should for a few of those things, because if you do it right, it does. And if you do it wrong, clearly it doesn't, and it can cause you more challenges. So just to try and kick us off with a little bit of interaction, I guess. Does anybody recognize the 2 logos that we've got on screen there? If you do, drop them into the chat window. I'd love to see if people recognize these 2 different cloud providers that most people probably use almost every day. And I'll give it a pause just to see if we get any names pop in the box. But certainly I use these 2 every day. So if I give you an example, the one on the right-hand side of your screen is Google Photos, but it's Google in general. So if you use Gmail, you're using Google's cloud. I personally use Google Photos to back my phone up. Every time I take a picture on my phone, it uploads automatically to Google. And it's saved in Google. So if I lose my phone, I have that photo that I can access on my laptop. I can share it with friends and family. It's easily accessible. On the left-hand side of the screen, there's iCloud. So if you use iTunes Music Service as an example, you are using iCloud to access that music library. So a couple of good examples of why we use the cloud today and how some of the largest companies out there are using cloud to give us access to our different content, irrelevant of where we are, irrelevant of the device that we use, and the simplicity that it brings to us as users. So that's an example of the types of clouds that we have. If I move on, there's 3 different types of clouds we're going to talk about today. There's another type of cloud as well, but I'm putting this in for a little bit of context to get us started. So we're going to talk about private clouds, we're going to talk about public clouds, and we're going to talk about hybrid clouds. So when we talk about a private cloud, it's an IT environment that somebody has built that lives inside their own data center. As you or I, it would be a filing cabinet that we have in our house at home. When we talk about a public cloud, it's taking advantage of a service that somebody offers us, such as Google Mail, Gmail as an example, such as Evernote, such as Microsoft OneDrive. These would all be examples of public clouds that we as consumers would potentially use every day. And then a hybrid cloud is a mix of the 2. So I may have something that both lives inside my house, but also lives on a data center. So a good example of that, again, would be a photo that I take on my iPhone. It lives both on my iPhone, so it's inside my private device, but it also lives in Google's cloud. So therefore it's on the public cloud as well. Therefore, I'm taking advantage of a hybrid cloud type structure from that example. And I'm trying to bring that down to real world examples that we can relate to from an everyday perspective. So there are 3 types of clouds that we're going to talk about primarily today. And innovation doesn't happen in its own. It doesn't happen in a vacuum, and technology isn't the be all and end all from this perspective. So there's three things that we need to consider when we think about cloud, and those are the laws of physics, they're the laws of economics, and the laws of the land. So legislation, regulation that we need to consider. And when we talk about the laws of physics, we talk about how quickly I can access that content. So again, if I come back to the idea of my phone, if I have a track from iTunes that's on my phone and I hit play, it's going to play instantly because the song lives on the phone. Whereas if it isn't on the phone, but it's in Apple Music, when I hit play, it's going to take a moment for me to download that song from Apple Music and play it for me. I can't make that song download any faster than the speed of light. They're the restrictions that are put in place. So therefore, when we consume things that are in a public cloud over the internet, we are limited by the speed that we can get access to that data or that content based on the speed of light. Now, if we're building an IT environment and an environment where we're interacting with customers, we're trying to make payments, all these types of things, we're trying to check for records, all of the typical environments that we have in an enterprise type environment today, that time may be a problem. So if we think about making a payment at a checkout at a supermarket example, the longer it takes for me to make a chip and pin payment, potentially the longer queue that we're going to have to line at the checkout, which is going to impact the supermarket, it's going to impact the store. They may have to bring, they may have to open new tellers, they may have to employ more people, all because of the time that infrastructure has taken for it to do the chip and pin payment. So it's a real example of how having a data center that the laws of physics are putting boundaries on us potentially can be a barrier to entry for the actual customer themselves. There's then the law of economics. So we all want the best we can possibly buy, but we can't always justify having the best. So we've got to understand what is the value of paying for, the best service possible if it's a service that actually doesn't deliver any value to me. So as an organization, we have to consider the cost of the economics, the consumption of the economics, the trade-off of paying something upfront versus having it over a long period of time. And I tried to consider an example of this when I was thinking about it before, paying upfront versus long-term cost. And you could use the example of a mortgage on a house. If I took an interest-only mortgage, after 20 years, I still don't own any of the house. And if I can't afford to then buy the house outright, I'm going to have to leave the house. And I've lost all of the money that I've paid into it for 20 years. That would be, in that instance, you're consuming a cloud-like approach versus you may choose to buy it and therefore you have a tangible asset. Again, if you buy a house and you pay off the interest as well as the capital on the house every month, after 20 years, hopefully you've got a house. You've got a tangible asset at the end of that period. And these are the things that we need to consider when we talk about cloud, because we might choose for economic reasons to build a private cloud that lives inside our data center because we've got tangible assets at the end, or we may choose to pay a consumption model because we actually have no idea whether we need a 2-bedroom house, a 4-bedroom house, or a 15-bedroom house, and therefore we want the flexibility of being able to move over the years without having to try and sell it. So again, these comes down to the economics of why we would choose the different models that we would have. And then there's laws of the land. So by this we mean legislation and regulation. As an example, as a UK citizen, my data cannot live outside the boundaries of the UK. So if I'm taking advantage of or if I'm a provider of cloud, I need to make sure that that data is going to reside inside the UK at all times. So how do you do that if you're using a Google or if you're using, and we'll talk about the different types of cloud in the next couple of slides, different types of public clouds, but there might be legislation and regulation that means that you must run things on premises for those types of examples. And then as we speak to customers, they typically say that, or we ran a survey with a company called ESG, and 92% of customers say that they don't believe that the on-premise data center is going away anytime soon. And it's not going away anytime soon for those reasons we mentioned above. There will always be some applications that you need that level of performance of running it on-premise. There potentially will always be that challenge of not allowing the data to live outside of the country in which the citizens live. So for those reasons, there will always be the need for an on-premise or a private cloud. And then 83% of customers say that they see the value of having consistent infrastructure between a public cloud and a private cloud. And I'll come on to why that consistent infrastructure is so important in a couple of slides' time. So the truth really is we have public clouds, we have private clouds, we have hybrid clouds. The answer is we see the future most definitely as a hybrid cloud environment. And if I try and break down the different elements that make up the different types of clouds that we can access, I thought about it as a pizza. Now, this actually is a slide that somebody that works for me built. I love it. I think it's a great example because most people have consumed the pizza at some point in their life. A number of people have built their own pizza and enjoyed it with children. It's a, it's a great thing to do in an evening. So if we think about pizza as a service, if you go to the supermarket and you buy all of the different types of ingredients, you bring it home, you build it, you put it together, you put it in the oven, you cook it in your own kitchen, you buy your own drinks. Really, that's traditional IT. That's going away, and it's buying servers, it's buying storage, it's buying networking, and it's putting it together, and it's paying people that have the knowledge to build all of that for you in your private data center. If we look at the first level of cloud, really infrastructure as a service, as we call it, you go to the store and you buy one of these pizzas where the dough is pre-made, the cheese is on it, the topping is on it, and it's in a cellophane wrap. All you have to do is bring it home and put it in the oven, right? And then you get to consume it. You have to provide your own drinks, your own plates and things such as that. That's IT as a service. And what we mean by that is you go to a cloud provider and you ask for access to something that's very quick, very simple. You have it for a limited time period, and then you hand it back when you're done. So infrastructure as a service is one of the levels of cloud. The next level of cloud, the next, evolution of cloud is platform as a service. So this really is where you get a takeaway delivery. I had a text message from Domino's this morning telling me 50% off if I want to take advantage of a pizza delivery this evening. All I have to do is wait for the pizza to be delivered and sort out my own drinks. I guess with Domino's, you can even have drinks delivered as well. But in the IT world, when we think about a platform as a service, what we're really talking about is everything is built for me in a public cloud, and all I have to do is drop my applications onto it that I want to consume. So I just have to enjoy it. And then when we think about the final evolution, it's software as a service, which is the equivalent of going to a restaurant. So simply all I'm doing is I'm turning up and I'm enjoying my pizza. I don't need to wash my dishes. I don't need to throw away the cardboard at the end of the day. And this is what we would consume from a consumer perspective. We would think about this as Netflix. I'm simply consuming a service. Or we would think about this as Google or Gmail as an example. These would be software as a service. In an enterprise landscape, this would be Office 365, or this would be Salesforce.com, or this would simply be where I say, I don't want to build this infrastructure. I don't want to have to worry about managing it. I just want to take advantage of the benefits that it delivers to me as a customer. Okay, so hopefully that's broken down the three different silos that we have within in a cloud. By the way, it goes on, but it starts to get a little bit more complex as you start to get into functions as a service and containers as a service. So I've intentionally left that out for this conversation. So we mentioned before public cloud and private clouds. Why would somebody build a private cloud over taking advantage of a public cloud? Well, it can be because of security measures. It can be because of latency. It can be because of regulation. It could be because of data privacy levels. It could be that they're a very large customer and they already have IT operations that work very well. They already have a data center themselves. They've already invested in IT technology, and therefore they want to build their own private cloud that can act like a public cloud. And you can absolutely do that. And I'll talk you through how we do that. The reasons why people might want to invest in public cloud is it's almost instant. You don't need to worry about the underlying infrastructure. And some of the benefits of public cloud versus private cloud is if I'm an application developer, as an example, I'm creating a startup. I don't know anything about infrastructure, but I know something about an application. Then I'm going to take advantage of a public cloud because I don't want to learn about all of the underlying infrastructure. So this would enable me to spin up an application, drop it onto a public cloud provider, and start issuing it out into the App Store or whatever it may be for me to start making a profit straight away. Now, the good thing about that, very quick, very simple. However, you don't know how long it's going to cost you over a certain time period. And the benefits of public cloud is it's a very low cost of entry because you pay for what you consume. People can consume it very easily. So I pay £2 a month to save my photos onto Google Cloud. Very, very simple for me to do that. It would cost me a lot more should I choose to buy infrastructure to save that in my own home. So that would be some of the reasons why people take advantage of public cloud. By the way, there's also a thing called shadow IT, which is basically where areas inside a business say, I can't get access to the infrastructure that I need internally inside my organization. So instead of trying, I'm just going to take my credit card out and I'm going to pay for a service from somebody that can offer me that instantaneously. And that's a huge challenge for IT organizations in general. But then we have the benefit of hybrid cloud. And hybrid cloud really is where I take advantage of both of these. So I'm going to have some applications that run on premises or in my private cloud, and I'm going to have some applications that run off premises. I like to think of this as burstability. If if I'm a large IT environment already, I know I can get better performance. I know I can get better service level agreements by running them in my own data center. But should it come to Christmas and I'm a retailer, I might not want to have to buy double or triple the amount of infrastructure to consider the impact of the run up to Christmas. Therefore, if I'm running a hybrid cloud, I can run things on premises as I need them and take advantage of a public cloud as I need it. I can consume it, I can pay for what I use. When I've stopped using it, I can roll back into my private cloud. So therefore, I'm getting the best of both worlds from an economics perspective and from a performance perspective. And that sounds really simple. Unfortunately, it's not quite so simple. We then have the benefit of multi-cloud, which confuses things again. And when we talk about multi-cloud, we mean you're consuming 2 or more public clouds. So you might also have a private cloud as well. Now, the reason why people would consume multi-cloud is different, and I'm going to introduce a term called hyperscalers, and hyperscalers are Microsoft Azure, they're Amazon Web Services, and it's Google Cloud. And these are the very large IT infrastructure companies that we know today that offer a cloud service for people to consume. And these different hyperscalers offer a different level of service, different qualities, different APIs, so plugins to enable customers to do things. And this is the advantage that we have of multiple clouds. As I speak to customers as I go around EMEA over the last number of years, customers typically tell me that they believe they will consume up to 5 different cloud providers in the next 2 to 3 years. And on the next slide, I'm going to show you why customers are consuming these different cloud providers. But as an example, it could absolutely be in my benefit as a customer to run something on premises in a private cloud, to take advantage of something from Microsoft because they have a data center based in London. Therefore, I can keep my data sovereignty inside the UK. I then may have something that doesn't need to sit inside the UK, but I can take advantage of a service that sits in Google in Ireland, as an example. It could be non-regulatory. So you get all of these benefits from having multiple clouds. And again, a multi-cloud simply means I'm running 2 or more public clouds and I'm trying to move data between them. A hybrid cloud means I'm running an on-premises infrastructure and an off-premises infrastructure. So we typically see customers running multi-hybrid clouds. Yeah, because you're taking advantage of multiple clouds and you're both on premises and off premises. So I mentioned before about the different types of services that are available. This hopefully puts some of that into perspective for you. So, Amazon Web Services, we all know that they started as, Amazon.com, order something, you get it the next day. They had to build an environment that was as flexible to meet their demands. Believe it or not, Amazon Web Services was actually born by them building their own IT infrastructure and realizing that they had to scale for the likes of Christmas. They had to scale for the likes of Black Friday. And therefore, it caused them this problem that they had all of this extra infrastructure all of the year round. So they then started selling it to people. So they didn't actually intend to create a cloud provider. They created it by their need for all of this additional resources. So people take advantage of Amazon Web Services for things like neurolinguistics. So we know Alexa. Well, customers can take advantage of the Alexa services by using the AWS cloud. So what benefit might that bring to a customer? With Microsoft as an example, they have some very special GPUs in their systems that enable them to work very well with seismic data. So if I'm a gas or an oil customer, I may choose to run that seismic data through Microsoft Azure because I'm going to get a better return on my investment. E.g., I'm going to find oil wells significantly easier with Amazon Azure than I would do with Amazon AWS. So as a customer, I may need the neurolinguistic benefits, but I may also be looking for oil and gas and therefore take advantage. So we absolutely see customers saying there is a benefit for me to run this service on this hyperscaler in this location because of the benefit that it offers, and run this service on a different one. The challenge that we have really is how do you manage these if you're taking advantage of these different clouds? So it should be pretty simple. And in essence, it should look pretty much like this. I've got my private cloud, I've got my public cloud, and I'm consuming that service. In reality, we know customers are going to take advantage of more than one cloud. And so it starts to become a little bit like this. That then starts to cause some challenges for customers. So as we scale, if we try and break it down, typically, and there could be a whole bunch of different reasons why you're using different cloud providers. I've built some examples here for you. So, we've got one specific cloud provider that provides us with something very unique. Again, think of the seismic data from Microsoft Azure. We've then built another cloud that we need to run on premises for a very specific reason. It could be a different cloud provider, and it could be internal risk, as an example. We then acquired a new company and they use a different cloud provider altogether. If you remember 2 slides previous, there's 4,200 certified cloud providers out there. So there's lots of different cloud providers that you can use. They may be consuming a service from one of the smaller cloud providers. And then we've got some application developers inside the organization who are using shadow IT, and they're consuming services to build their applications as we go forward. So as an organization, I've created myself a challenge because I've got management silos across all of these different clouds, which basically means how do I know what we're using on all of them, and how do I know that we're being as efficient as we can by using all of these different clouds. On top of that, we've got the complex workload migrations. It should be simple to take. I've got a workload that runs today on Microsoft Azure and I want to put it on AWS. Believe it or not, you can't do that without going through a replatforming exercise. And replatforming means you need to rewrite the application from the scratch, or you need to start all over again. That's very time consuming and it's very costly. So typically we don't see customers do this. So you've now got a challenge that we call, which is cloud lock-in. I'm locked into that cloud provider and I can't do anything about it. Or if I can, it's going to be very costly and it's going to be very timely. The next challenge is new skills. All of these different clouds have different ways to manage them. They have different ways to operationalize them. So what this typically means is that we then spend more time managing the cloud than we do taking advantage of the services that the cloud was there to offer for us in the first instance. And finally is security. So the hyperscalers are very good at building security that protects their infrastructure. The challenge is the security when you consume their infrastructure, it's now your responsibility to protect your application. And the way that you'll do that on one cloud versus a different cloud is very different. So you now need to pay some very expensive people and some very smart people to understand how you build security into all of these clouds to make sure that you're not at risk, because your relationship and responsibility with the cloud provider is it's your responsibility to protect your data and your application that sits inside that cloud. So as we break these down, we've got this phenomenal opportunity with these hyperscalers and these different clouds that offer us unique services and APIs that we can integrate into very quickly and enable us to scale up very quickly. But we've now got all of these risks in front of us if we don't have a consistent model across all of them. So I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time on this slide, but one thing that we introduced a number of years ago was something called Dell Technologies Cloud, and it's a way that we can integrate a public cloud, but then enable you to take advantage of the different public clouds on top of that. The benefit of this is it reduces the complexity because your data actually sits inside the Dell Technologies private cloud, but you can then consume the different services that you may want to consume from the different hyperscalers. And the benefit is you're not needing to re-platform every time, and you're not needing to move the data all the time. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time, but if people want to talk about it afterwards, I've got some details for you at the end that you can absolutely follow up on, and I'd love to talk to you about it. And the reason I'm not going to is just simply in the interest of time, and it could go very deep, that may not be what everybody's interested in. So when we talk about cloud first, I've met with so many customers who say, I have a cloud first agenda. And I say, why do you have a cloud first agenda? And the answer is because our board have told us that we need to have a cloud first agenda, which sounds absolutely fine. But what does a cloud first agenda really mean? Well, the challenges that you're going to face is, as we mentioned before, not everything runs better in a cloud than it does on premises. And by the way, a cloud first agenda could absolutely be a private cloud that we build on premises. So what I like to say to customers is we need to look at a data first agenda. So how do we make sure that we run the data in the right place to give you the best service levels, to give you the best response time, that has the right economics associated with it, that enables you as a business to drive value from that service, as opposed to drop it in a cloud to tick a box for the board. And it's a very simple thing to do, but really you're looking at the other angle. And this enables us to say, we have a great conversation that we do, which talks about landing zones. And effectively we say, if I have an application that's really critical to me, it needs really fast access. It might be a trading application as an example. I'm going to want to run that on premises because it offers a unique value to me and my business. And if we inject any latency into that process, we potentially might buy or sell something at the wrong time and therefore lose money. Therefore, it's in our company's interest to run that on premises because we then control the latency, the performance, and the cost. And also, as we look at, I'll talk through cost models in just a moment. There might be another option that says we see no value in managing our CRM, right? Our customer record management. Therefore, we're going to pay to have it as a software as a service. A great example is Salesforce.com. This is because we don't need to build the infrastructure. Somebody's built a phenomenal application and we're going to consume that application instead of wasting our IT's time building it and managing it ourselves. Another great example of that is Office 365. Why do you want to build an email environment when Microsoft have built Office 365 and Outlook Web Access to do that for you to manage your email? They do it very well. Why do we as an organization want to choose and build that ourselves and spend time doing it? So as you consider the different types of data, it will help you understand where you should place that data and how you should move forward with it. And as I say, we talk about it in terms of landing zones and where we want to place this data to help customers. So as we talk about Dell Technologies Cloud, really, we mentioned it before in terms of public clouds and private clouds. When I talk to customers, it's really about consistent infrastructure and consistent operations. That starts with the hardware and the software solutions. With inside Dell Technologies, we believe that VMware should be the cloud operating system of choice. So think of it as the operating system that gives us all of the benefit. The benefit comes from the software. So we deliver this consistent infrastructure that enables us to run the same application either on premises or off premises. We can run them in virtual machines, containers, Kubernetes. I haven't got into that level today, but I have a link for you in the follow-on if you want to find out more about Kubernetes and containers. And certainly if this is a space you're interested in, it's where the industry is going. So I absolutely recommend spending some time and learning a little bit more about them. So we build our consistent infrastructure from VMs and containers and systems. We then layer that with consistent operations. So this means I do the same technique. I use the same API to deploy a virtual machine or a container, whether I'm deploying it into a Microsoft cloud or whether I'm deploying it into a VMware cloud or into a Google cloud. This is really important because it means I don't need to train people on all of these different systems. I also don't run the risk of making a mistake that might take my application offline. It also means I can build security policies that protect my applications, and I run those security policies across all of my different clouds. So this is why we believe consistent operations is extremely important. So we tie consistent operations and consistent infrastructure into the Dell Technologies Cloud Platform. And then on top of that, it's about how do we help customers with consumption models. So I mentioned before about paying for cloud. If you have no idea how the application is going to be used or scale, then cloud is very good because you can scale up and you can scale down as the application is used. If you have a good knowledge of how that application is going to be used, so it's in existence already, it's an ERP system as an example, you know how that is being used, it will always be cheaper to run that type of application on premises in your own cloud than it will a public cloud. And your CFO will thank you for it. CFOs really dislike this changes month after month. The challenge with cloud, I saw a tweet a couple of days ago, somebody woke up on Friday morning, their own cloud environment that they've been using to learn and teach themselves, that's not their own cloud environment, it's an environment they pay for on AWS, has just cost them £1,200 for a month's subscription of their own private money while they're trying to learn some computing. They could have bought an infrastructure lab and ran it at home for much cheaper than that and got the knowledge. And that's the challenge with cloud. You pay for it as you consume it. If you forget to turn it off, you're going to be continuing paying for it. So CFOs typically don't like that because they have no idea from month to month how much it's going to cost. If one month you ramp things up, you turn them on, it's going to cost you a whole bunch of money. The next month you don't use it, it's going to be a lot less. CFOs typically like a predictable, consistent pricing model because it enables them to predict for the future and build OPEX models and CAPEX models as they go forward. So the Dell Technologies Cloud Platform, we're able to give you the best of both worlds from a burstability, as I call it, but also you've got the ability of a flat pricing structure. And then it's all of the infrastructure enablement pieces that come on top of it. How do we help you with the security elements? How do we help you with understanding which application should run on-premise and which application should run off-premise? And again, so that's the consistent value of added services from a cloud perspective. So I've mentioned it a couple of times, but I talk about elasticity and burstability. And this for me is how do we take an application that runs on-premise, burst into the cloud, use it as we need to consume it and use it, and then switch it off and go back to a private cloud inside our data centers. With the Dell Technologies Cloud Platform, we provide this. It's simple. Because it's simple, it's consistent infrastructure, it's consistent operations. You only have to train your people on one type of technology, or you only have to learn one type of technology yourself instead of learning from different cloud providers. And it's predictable because we've entered into an agreement up front. We can help customers understand what their pricing model is going to look like instead of this fluctuability. So the reason why, certainly with the conversations with the customers that I have, the reason that's of value to them is they know what it's going to cost them over 3 years, over 5 years, over 7 years. And that's something that you cannot get into a conversation with when you talk about multiple cloud providers, and certainly not when people are using shadow IT. So hopefully that's been useful for you. That's taking you over the slides that I've got today. We do now have time for Q&A. I'm not sure if any have come in, Margaretta, that you can read out, or if you
well, there's one or two that are coming in actually, Stephen. The first one was around security. I think you touched on security briefly, but it would be good to expand on that a little bit more. What to watch out for in a multi-cloud world? What are the considerations around risk as organizations become more complex and their multi-cloud strategy is more complex? So if you could expand on that, that would be great.
Absolutely. So there was a survey, and I can't remember whether it was by IDC or Gartner. It was about 2 years ago now. And when speaking to the C-suite, what was your biggest risk about using public cloud? And the answer was security in the public cloud. That was their biggest concern and their biggest risk. And the challenge is, I don't want to pick on any particular hyperscaler, but if you use one of the hyperscalers, they will protect their underlying infrastructure. As you open an application, firewall ports are going to be open. It's vanilla carte blanche. It's as you consume it. So you've now got to layer on all of those security policies to make sure that you're protected. Now, if you run a traditional IT infrastructure and you're a large company, as an example, you likely inside your data center, you have people who look after the network security, you have people who look after firewalls, you have people who look after the physical security. Physical security is obviously less of an issue in the cloud. But when you upload something to the cloud, all of those ports are open. So how do you know that as people are testing, as they're building applications, if you have a challenge, they don't just say, right, turn the firewall off, because that's the easiest way for me to fix that it's not a connectivity problem, and then forget to turn those firewall elements back on afterwards. So potentially, it's not a problem, but it's a problem if you don't put the right level of securities and wrappers in place to protect it. It is then a problem if you deploy something into one cloud and then you now want to try and deploy it into another cloud. How do you now make sure that, number one, they can speak to each other if they need to? And what are the different skills that you need for protecting it for security on one cloud versus the other cloud, which can in itself become tricky because you've got all of the other elements typically just from the internet built into it to make sure that the connectivity works, to make sure that it's not a firewall problem, it's not a security policy. So when we talk about it in Dell Technologies Cloud Platform, we layer it with it's NSX, it's Network Security by VMware, and it enables us to build a security policy. So then that security policy follows the VM or the application as it moves around. So irrelevant of where that application is sitting, it has a security policy tied to it to protect it. So now as I deploy services, I don't need to consider about how I protect each one of those services because I just attach a policy to it that then gives me a much more rigid security infrastructure in the first instance.
Wow, that's really helpful. I think there's some more questions coming through, and I've got a few questions coming through from text messages as well around, you touched on management and operational silos as we look at complex workload migrations. Could you talk a little bit more about the skill sets involved with dealing with some of the hyperscalers and the different cloud providers and how that adds complexity to an organization?
Yeah, so if we just take the main three, Google, AWS, and Azure, they all run their own operating effectively. So Azure, Microsoft runs an Azure operating system, and therefore people need to understand how Microsoft does IT. If you use Google, use Anthos, and therefore again, it's Google's way of doing IT. And AWS have a multitude of different ones depending how you're consuming that service. So you start to get into the element of needing to understand, well, actually, what do I consume with inside Google? Am I asking for an S3 bucket, which is a type of storage container? Am I asking for the construct of a VM doesn't exist inside AWS, native AWS. It does if you lay a VMware on top of it, but natively they have their own constructs. So now it's even different terminology that you have from Microsoft to Google to AWS. Once you lay a VMware on top of them, you now have a consistent language that you're speaking, and it's VMs that you're consuming, and it's containers that you're consuming, and it's virtual disks that you're consuming. So instantly it's one operating system that people need to know, which is VMware, instead of having people who are trained on Microsoft, people who are trained on Google, and people who are trained on AWS. And there's all of these types of certifications that you can go and get from, there's lots of different providers out there, like Coursera as an example. And you can spend hours upon hours upon hours to get certified just for Microsoft. And now if as an organization you decide that actually Google is a strategic platform, you've now got to put all of your people, or you've got to spend all of your time going back through that training again, which is completely unique specifically for the Google Cloud. So it's the time constraints, it's the cost constraints, and then it's these silos of, well, do I need to pay for some people who just know Microsoft? And do I need to pay for some people who just know Google and just know AWS? And what if somebody's sick? What if somebody's off? What if somebody retires? How do I now, make sure that we've cross-pollinated those skills across the organization?
I think you've touched on a really good point, Stephen, around the skill sets. And I guess for a lot of people that have joined this call, they'll be wondering, how do they develop a career path in cloud and in multi-cloud, and how do they approach it? And I think the points you raise, raise more complexity than anything else, that they're actually all quite different. But if you were guiding anybody starting out in their career right now around a career in technology, and particularly looking at cloud providers, what kind of first steps could they do to educate themselves and raise awareness about how to navigate the career and learn about these providers?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've got a link on the next slide, so I'll provide that link at the end. But VMware have done a great job of creating something called Cube Academy, and it really takes you through 101 on containers, 101 on virtualization, 101 on Kubernetes. You may not know what these things mean right now, but they're the construct of the cloud as we go forward. So as we talk about the evolution of IT, we talk about cloud services, we talk about microservices, we talk about cloud native applications. So people need to understand these constructs from the start. And like I say, there's a Dell link in there that will take you through a few different elements specifically to Dell. And then there's Cube Academy that will take you through VMware's perspective on where people should be spending their time to learn. But definitely people should spend time to understand, what is a container? Why is a container important? And how are we going to use containers as we go forward? And those links will certainly help. And it may seem a little bit daunting in the first instance, because again, even for someone who's been in IT for a number of years, containers are a very different construct. So actually, if you don't have necessarily all the legacy knowledge of IT, it's beneficial for you to start with containers, because you don't need all of that legacy knowledge. So it's a great place to break in. And VMware have built a great site that gives you a great foundational level, and then it builds up to really how we're going to run software in the future as we look at the different clouds. So that link is available on the next slide.
Wonderful. We have some good questions coming in as well, which is this one from Cecilia. How can SMEs and startups best leverage their strengths to take advantage of cloud-based opportunities? So that's really from a startup and SME perspective.
Yeah, so if I was a startup customer and I've built an application, using a public cloud is absolutely the right and easy thing to do, because you can just consume it. You don't need to worry about the underlying technology. So I think if I understand the question, can you just read the question again, just to make sure?
Yeah, so how can SMEs and startups best leverage their strengths, I guess, as agile, small organizations, to take advantage of cloud-based opportunities?
Yeah, okay. So I guess the benefit that the cloud brings is almost instant access, right? You could have an application up and running in a couple of days versus the traditional infrastructure that might take weeks to get things delivered to site and then get them up and running. So a small company, the agility that cloud brings by its very definition, the agility, the idea of agile software in its own very definition means that I want to release different iterations of my code potentially every hour. Right, and if you've got an install base that changes that much, or you've got a code base that changes that much, you may want to push out new applications every hour. The cloud can offer you that type of ability. I'll give you an example in terms of Formula One. And I hope I'm allowed to use this terminology, but I'm going to anyway because I've started. But the McLaren Formula One car has 19,000 unique parts on the car. And as it goes around the racetrack, every time it passes the pits, it dumps a load of data into the pits. It then sends that information back to their headquarters, which is in Woking. And then they have all of the people taking advantage of that private cloud to pull out different metrics to understand everything that they need to know. Over the course of the season, McLaren actually develop 100,000 new parts, and 18,000 of those parts will be replaced on the car throughout the course of the year. They do that by this agile nature of constantly releasing. If they don't make an improvement every hour in the car, they're effectively going backwards from a race perspective. So as a small business, how can you take advantage of the cloud? It's being able to access quicker to market. Instead of having to go through this traditional waterfalls where we have an idea of how we can make our product, our solution, our service better, but it's going to take us 6 months to deploy it, when we may have then lost our unique proposition in the market, somebody else may have beaten us to it. When you're using the cloud environment, you can then push that out in the space of potentially hours, which may fundamentally make you more competitive than your counterparts. So, it doesn't need to be a startup. As an insurance company, as a loan provider, right now, if I can offer a better APR rate than anybody else, and I can build an application that means people can apply for that interest rate instantaneously, instead of putting a plan in place and saying we're going to release a new loan to market, but we can't do it for 6 weeks because our infrastructure can't enable us to. If we're built in a cloud native, agile environment, you're going to have quicker access to market and quicker routes, and therefore happier customers and better returning customers.
Yeah, and great example too, so thanks for that. Another question's come through from Nicholas. I've often come across Microsoft in my accounts doing cloud assessments, and unsurprisingly finding that everything could go into the cloud, inevitably the customer ending up with a cost shock, which you touched on, Stephen. Do we have any service engagements where we can help a customer not only assess which of their applications are suitable for the cloud, but also help them understand the cost to move to the different hyperscalers so they can have an honest comparison with the private cloud?
So we do. I think from a Dell perspective, it just starts with understanding how we support our customers in the first instance anyway. So it's a consultative approach. It's about understanding the customer's environment. It's about understanding the landing zones. So what applications do you run today? How important are they to you? What happens if they go offline? What happens if you need to migrate them? There's all of these different types of questions that we can go through. We can do a lot of that in the first instance with my team and account management teams. That is absolutely free engagements. We do have a much more deep dive engagement that comes from consulting, and that would be a cloud assessment. It's a rigorous time exercise that we'd go through, but that is obviously much more consultative, and it's a much more thorough approach. We can then use tools from VMware as an example. They have a tool called Cloud Health, and it will allow you to get a view of how much you're spending on all of the different clouds. Now, it means that you need to be using the different clouds today, but it's a great way to plug it. Think of it as open banking. It's a very similar way that enables you to pull the data from your different cloud providers and saying, based on this utilization, you're going to spend X this year with hyperscaler 1 and X this year with hyperscaler 2. And then effectively from the back of that, we can say, actually, we think we can help you build an on-premises cloud that will be cheaper than those different hyperscalers, but will also offer you the same flexibility, the same burstability, and the same types of flexible payment models that you look for when you take advantage of a traditional cloud provider.
And I guess, Stephen, from your side, have you seen lots of organizations where they have had that cost shock, where they've had quite a fright from unexpected costs coming in from their cloud provider because they've had a surge or they've had a busy period and they just haven't had time to go back and really consider the strategy and cost implications? So I guess once bitten, twice shy for a lot of organizations around this. But keen to hear, what are the lessons learned for organizations that have had a bit of a cost shock?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I would say 2 years ago in the US, we started to see customers repatriating back onto private data centers from cloud providers, because they saw that actually, yes, there were some risks with security, and yes, it was costing a little bit more than we expected, and actually the performance isn't quite as good. So we saw customers moving back on premises. Now, typically there's about a 12 to 18 month leg between what happens in the US before it typically lands in the UK, and then we start to see that same trend across Europe after the UK. We'd started seeing that trend, and then obviously, the world changed quite drastically for us in the UK in March. And what we saw a lot of customers do, their first reaction was consume from a cloud provider because it gives me instant access. The problem that they then had was April was very, very large bills. So now all of a sudden we've reacted instantly, we've got people up and running, but now we've got huge bills, and we now need to actually look at our strategy for the longer term to clearly get these applications that we needed running. So we've done a great job in getting people up and running, but actually, what is our strategy for the future? So certainly I'm getting involved in a lot of customers at the moment that have said, we managed through April and May we can't continue to pay this level of cost because, you know, we've consumed more in a couple of months than we would have anticipated to spend in a year. So actually, how do we go through a digital transformation and look at how we build the agility that we get from the cloud, but we build it into our own data centers? So certainly customers within the UK, and predominantly it's been kicked into life more because of the challenges that we've seen over the last couple of weeks. Before that, last couple of months. Before that, it was the trickle that we saw coming from the US as the trend that we were seeing.
I think we've probably had enough surprises for the year and unexpected costs with all of this pandemic. So absolutely, I think, is there any closing out, because I think we're coming to the end of our questions, is there any guidance for organizations that are at the early stages of kind of assessing their cloud strategy and looking at the complexity of a multi-cloud play? Any kind of final parting comments from you, Stephen?
Yeah, I mean, the cloud in general is fantastic, right? It opens up a huge amount of opportunities for us. The likes of these different services that we can take advantage of, the burst abilities, you know, building a cloud environment is absolutely, or utilizing a cloud is absolutely the right way to go. I firmly believe that if done correctly and you get your strategy right and you look at a data first strategy, then you can build an on-premise cloud that is more cost efficient than a public cloud. You'll get better utilizations from it. And you'll still be able to take advantage of the public cloud for the specific services that you need. And if you get that right, then you can go through digital transformation and basically make your business so much more agile and changes into the market that you then add more value back to your customers than you would by building a traditional IT or simply by consuming the services from one of the cloud providers.
Great, wonderful. I think we've nearly got to the end, Stephen. We've wrapped up in the questions, so over to you to close out.
Perfect. So just the call to actions that I've had. Hopefully today's been useful for you. I've put the Dell Technologies cloud site there for you. That will take you through specifically what we offer. I've tried to be more generic in the talkings around cloud rather than taking you, down into the very specifics about what we do at Dell. So the top link here will give you some of the information that we specifically do in Dell Technologies and how we're adapting cloud ourselves. The next one is the Cube Academy that I spoke about. It's a great starting point for anybody that wants to learn about cloud native applications. You want to learn about containers. You want to start to skill yourself in the software of the cloud as we go forward. If you'd like to speak to myself or any of my team, there's my LinkedIn address and my Twitter handle. Both of those are far better than trying to contact me on email because I get hundreds of emails a day and don't get the chance to see or respond to many of them, but I respond to every single request on LinkedIn and I respond to everything on Twitter. So you'll get better access to me that way than my team get access to me. And then if you'd like to come and join us, I've put Lucy Ketley's detail here, who works in our talent acquisition team. She would love to have conversations with you, myself as well, Margareta as well. So, here are a couple of people that you can reach out to. We'd love to continue the conversation. If there's anything that we can do to help, that's exactly what we're here for. So I'd just like to thank everybody for their time. And, thank you for the questions. Thank you for listening. And hopefully it's been valuable.
Thank you, Stephen. Great session.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.